I guess my first question is, what drew you to each other as collaborators?
In like 2003, I was coming over to do a lecture, going over there to do a lecture in Lyon, France, and I got this package in the mail from someone named Gisele Vienne, and she said she liked my books and she wanted to know if I would stay 3 days when I was in Lyon and try experimenting with her on a theater piece. And she sent me some DVDs of her early work, and I thought they were really cool. And the big selling point is that she worked with this guy named Peter Rayberg, whose music I really, really like. So I said, okay. So I stayed and we experimented for 3 days with some performers and musicians and stuff, and we actually made our first piece basically in those 3 days. So it was obviously, it was really fun too. So obviously it was like really meant to be or something. So we just continued working together after that. So.
Yeah. That's correct.
All right.
I mean, we were supposed to work on one piece, but I guess we still have things to do together. So after 10 years, we're still collaborating.
Sure. And what was the process like of creating this particular piece, Kindertotenlieder?
The way Gisele and I always make pieces, there's one thing that's always the same, and it's that she'll just suddenly one day say to me like, oh, I have this idea for a new piece, and it's usually really, really early. And then we just kind of like, we talk about it usually for about 6 months or something, just all the time. And we kind of go back and forth about it, and then eventually the idea becomes really fleshed out. And at that point, then I always go and start writing texts to go with the piece. And sometimes the texts are just sort of slotted into a structure that she's making that's pretty fleshed out. And sometimes in the case of the Kindertotenlieder, I actually wrote the piece. I wrote a structure for the piece, and I wrote all the texts, and then there were movement pieces, and I would say like, oh, maybe something like this should happen here. So I just wrote this whole structure in the text, and then we started working on it, and worked about 6 months on it, and it stayed pretty close to what I wrote. I mean, we changed the text a little bit, and obviously I didn't know what the movements were. But of all the pieces we've done, this is the most where I like was involved. It's the most like, it's not like a theater piece at all. I mean, it's not. But it's the most like structured and pre-structured before we start. Usually, often it's much more kind of organic.
Yeah, I mean, there is also Jerk, but that's different because this is a piece we adapted from a novel that was wrote early on. From the other pieces, its own original text, so the Jerk is also. But Dennis is really the artist I'm talking the most, and exchanging actually on the topic. So, I mean, he's obviously writing the text, but I don't know, in Germany we would also say he's doing some kind of the dramaturgy. And then, of course, he's having a strong, amazing critical point of view on visuals and sound. And so, I mean, the conversation goes really on the entire project, on all these aspects, a little exchange about music and visuals and all that stuff.
What inspired this particular piece?
I mean, oh yeah, sorry, because that question was asked before and I forgot to say something very essential yesterday. Because you always forget how you build a piece, so you try to remember, and then I always find out that it's wrong. I mean, I don't want to make up something, but I just don't remember exactly how it was. So, but yeah, there was something. I mean, our first collaboration was a piece called "I Apologize" that was strongly inspired by Cooper's text and strongly inspired by French novelist Alain Robbe-Grillet, in which you could find 17 dolls representing Lolita girls, because Robbe-Grillet, like Nabokov, Lewis Carroll, I would say. So, but then first time I met Dennis, I didn't knew him, and I thought, oh, perhaps he's going to kick me out and say, what are all these like young girls on stage? I mean, you understand my literature at all. But he understood, try. So, and Kindertotenlieder, I would say it's kind of I would say there are different generation of dolls, and this is a new generation, and it's the first time in this teenager doll that I would try to do boy dolls and they were inspired by Dennis gave me pictures of George Miles actually. So trying to you have several dolls that will never represent George Miles, but it's trying how you would try to get closer to that pictures I got from Dennis. So that was certainly one inspiration and strong inspiration, and obviously all Dennis's writing. Also, there was the idea of try to represent several types of ceremonies. So staging ceremonies related to what is frightening us or the representation of death. So there is a funeral, and there is a black metal concert, and there is an Austrian pagan ceremony called First in March. So you have these three ceremonies blended together in that piece, and though it makes totally sense, I mean it is a possible blend because the teenagers in their ballet in Austria, they're connected to international culture, and they know black metal, and they know all that culture, and they would, I mean, they are very, they are as well practicing their local ritual, who you will see have strong links to horror movie culture, fantasy movie culture, or metal or rock music iconography. So obviously these kids, but being very excited by their very ancient ritual, are also excited by them because they have connection to their contemporary culture. So that was, for example, also. But there are many inputs. And then I did a series of photographs with two of the dolls in the French Alps and in the Austrian Alps, and then besides all the conversation we had, I also gave this photo series to Dennis, who wrote then the first, I mean, I wouldn't say sketch at first, I mean, it's more than a sketch of a play. He wrote, as he said, a play that he would readjust during the rehearsals.
After seeing this show yesterday, something that struck me were these different levels of reality that were happening at the same time, and perhaps like a lack of an absolute truth. Do you want to talk about the idea of truth or reality in your work?
A lack of truth?
Or not not a lack of truth.
An absolute. I mean, what you will see is neither wrong nor right, is neither truth nor it's part of reality. I mean, it's on stage and it's in front of you. So, I mean, there are definitely different layers of perceptions, and you will hopefully question what you're seeing. Everything is real, what you see. I mean, but what is, of course, in your reading of the play, what is supposed to be real, what is supposed to be incarnated, what is supposed to be disincarnated, what is the fruit from a delirious imagination, from a soft imagination, what is a dream. So we play on all these layers, and that are also partly reflecting the confusion of the main character, who tries to understand his story. So I guess these different layers of perceptions are reflecting the confusion and the clarity that is crossing the brain of the main character, who is encountering a ghost, the ghost of his dead friend.
I'd love to open it up to questions from the audience. If you have anything you'd like to know. Here, let's pass the mic around.
You mentioned horror films earlier. What films in general, when you were young or just beginning, kind of inspired you or influenced you in one way or another?
No, I mean, the reality is that I'm really afraid of horror. So I'm not watching so many horror movies. where.
But in terms of atmosphere or, you know.
I mean, when I was younger, we want to come from very early on, the first traumatic experience. I'm joking. But my mother is Austria, and I used to spend a lot of time in Austria and watching TV there. And then when we were smaller, there was a lot of program from Eastern Europe, from Czechoslovakia, Hungary. So I definitely got excited by these weird animation movies that would come from Eastern Europe, and that's certainly one because I was always very intrigued by puppetry but I've never been to a puppet play when I was a child, and neither later, so I didn't really know. I mean, I could imagine a puppet play, but I guess I didn't care so much. I was more fantasizing what I would dream puppetry would be, so what is certainly not what you mostly see. Yeah, I guess these early weird animation movies from Eastern Europe certainly were one of the influences I had. But then it's very multi-influence. I mean, it's not. I've been lucky to raise in a family where I got a very bad education, and my mother would introduce me to these amazing artists very early on, like Hans Bellmer or Franz van Stuck or Pierre Molinier, and that was obviously from early on like really strong artistical encounters. So they would bring me to the theater and to movies. So I got really raised, and my parents didn't have much money, but going to a theater or to, I mean, art was like food. They would never tell me, no, there is no money. So if we wanted to have a book or going to the theater, that was as essential to as getting some food. So I thought that was very strong, gave me a strong relation to art, an essential one.
Could you speak a little bit about your collaboration with the band KTL with regards to these performances?
Sure. So I first started to collaborate with Peter Reber in 2001 on a piece called Choreographer. And like Dennis, first I met the music of Peter, and I met the literature of Foucault before meeting the artists who were doing that. And probably I went through some musical crisis. I couldn't hear anything anymore, and when I discovered Peter's music, for me it was kind of a rebirth of my ear, and I got extremely impressed by this most powerful music. And so we started on this piece, and then we had several collaborations, and when we started to collaborate with Dennis in 2004, I guess the relation between Cooper, Switcher, and Peter's music was for me very obvious and strong. And then when we started to work on Kindertotenlieder, I wanted to have this taste of black metal, but I didn't want to stage a black metal band. I didn't thought it's that interesting to be that, one-to-one. And I got this really strong experience in London where Peter was invited by Sun to play with them on stage, and first the opening act was White House, so that was a very good night. Actually, that was probably one other influence for Kindertotenlieder. Most of the audience were men, and pretty large audience in White House. On the first act, they were rubbing themselves on the ends of Sun, so there was like something powerful. And then when I heard Peter with Sun, it was just amazing, because Sun, they just go so deep in the earth, and Peter sounded like bringing this like acid flashback in the music of Sun. So the combination was mostly exciting. And talking with Peter about Kindertotenlieder, I told him I would really like to develop what I heard in this concert. And Peter, who is an extremely smart person, told me we should not collaborate with Sun, but we should collaborate with Stephen O'Malley, who is, I would say, the most artistically orientated musician in Sun. So but Stephen was very busy living in the States, so we knew, but we decided to make a first tryout if it would work, if these two guys could work together and do great stuff. And that was like when I met Dennis in 2004, when Stephen and Peter started to make music in 2006 in the studio as first sketches for the piece. It was just like obvious. It was amazing from the first day, and I got lucky to hear all the process. And they were so excited by what they were doing that before even the piece was finished, they created the band KTL, named after Kindertotenlieder. So this piece is actually the origin of the band. And so they released, I think, the album even before we even put out the piece. So that was a very strong musical encounter. And then I thought, yeah, so there would be some very interesting, I was interested also in this very homoerotic tension that you could find in the music scene, in black metal, and in the rock scene that is sometimes not the most gay-friendly area, but that is so extremely homoerotic from my perspective. So I guess there is something about this contradiction, tension that is certainly crossing the piece too. And yeah, we've been collaborating now with KTL for all the pieces we did after Kindertotenlieder. I guess so. That was Cooper, a very strong artistic encounter.
Let's see. When I watched the piece, I was also struck by the language of these teenage boys and the choice of words that they worked with. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you found that voice?
I always use that voice ever since I was a teenager. So, the thing with this piece was we didn't want anything to be explicit. We wanted everything to be very elliptical, and we wanted everything to the whole point. I mean, and mostly when you do like live performance, if you have text in it, it's spoken text, it tends to dominate everything, and it tends to become the guide. And we were trying to fight against that, and we do in all of our work. So the main thing was like, because there is a lot of text in it, was to try to the text tell a kind of story, because there's kind of a story behind it that's actually very simple, but then like kind of hide it, kind of disguise the story too. So if you see the piece, you'll kind of notice that like when people talk, they start to say something, and then by the end of the sentence, it's kind of flipped around, turned into a metaphor or something. So that was for me, because I always write I really like the teenage voice. It's actually more of a Los Angeles voice than a teenage voice. It just happens that teenagers happen to also share that voice. It's my voice too, you can probably already tell. And so it was more that, it was how to complicate the voices, to make it sound like a teenager, but also have it be really artificial. So it's like really unreal. It's like, it sounds like a real teenage voice, but it does these things that a teenager would never do. It makes these complicated similes and different things, and it stops and starts at different points, and there's a lot of space that's full of like thought that's obviously not a thought that the characters would have.
How does pop culture play into the whole thing? Because I saw a lot of signifiers with death metal and concerts and kids and the way that kids talk. You know, you're saying in LA. Do you think pop culture comes into play a lot?
Well, hopefully not too much. I mean, it's a concert, and there's a band playing, and there's a little audience on stage watching it. It's in the middle of the forest, in the middle of winter and stuff, so it's a concert. But the band is very abstract. It's not like a band that, it's not like you're seeing an actual rock band play. But I don't know. I mean, there are reference points in it. I mean, the text references like Black Sabbath and things like that. But it was more sort of like I mean, the references are more like little jewels or something. I didn't. So, because like I said, everything kind of twists around. You don't ever land on anything. So it's more just kind of like a kind of way to introduce something that's kind of absurd or funny or recognizable or something for the audience to sort of grab onto or something. A kind of reference point that they could grab onto, because there's so much mystery in the piece. I don't know, but I don't know. I didn't think it was that much. Other than that, there's that much pop culture. I mean, the kids dress a certain way, and there's a kind of black metal aesthetic.
I mean, then you could see what I'm very interested in puppetry, or what you can see is you have these ancient wooden carved Austrian masks, and then you have, like, I would say, some type of cheap Halloween masks too, and then you have dolls, and I kind of like how these symbols go. I mean, I'm very interested in, one thing I was very excited by puppetry, and I guess you find a little bit this blend in the piece too, is puppetry comes from this most holy origin where the marionette was the Virgin Mary, and ancient puppetry was carrying around a sculpture of the gods or icons, and then I'm very interested into this art form somehow, I guess, is kind of disconsidered. It's kind of a lower, mainly more considered as a lower art form. So even like popular, so I like the bend between the Holy Virgin to the most stupidest puppet. And I think there is somehow, we go from the holiness to this falling apart element in the piece too. So.
We have a question in the back. I'll bring this to you.
Thank you. I haven't seen your piece, but I've seen your earlier work together. I've really been a fan for a long while, and I've always been struck by the way that you work with these incredibly singular presences of these different performers. Sits against the use of puppets, or how are these collaborators as well, the actors that you've found and worked with regularly over these years? How do you work with performers live?
So on stage, you have, so there are the 2 musicians, and then there are 4 dancers and 1 actor. You see life-size dolls and humans, and we really work in very different qualities of being there as an object, being there as a corpse, being there as a ghost, being there. So you will have all these different qualities of being there. Also from the object to the disincarnated body, to the dead body, to the holy body or hallucinatory body. So you find really all these layers of quality. And technically, so you'll have dolls that can be more live than certain humans or whatever. I mean, we play around with this oscillation. And then with the performers, you will see different layers of, they don't play the same game. You have very stylized bodies, and you have 2 super realistic, very psychological way of playing. So that creates different type of encounters. And so when 2 performers don't play the same language, you could imagine they're eventually not in the same scene, or one is not has not the same kind type of reality than the other one. So we play a lot with this confusing relation to this different body. And so with the dancer, we work more rhythmically and musically, and with the actor, I work more often, I mean, it's not, I mean, I tend to work more psychologically, but then also this movement of the dancer would also create some type of psychology, but we work more in a musical way. But basically, yeah, it's really working on this vibration of how you watch somebody and what is your relation to the body you're watching. Sometimes you would totally disincarnate it or just see an image, and sometimes you feel being really in front of somebody alive with 3 meters away from you. But I like to really work on your moving perception, so you don't have like one perception of a body. You would consider it differently. You could eventually consider the same body differently through the development of the play. But yeah, it's mainly, even if you see there is a lot of narrative, it's the way it's built, it's more music, it's built more in a musical and choreographical way, but it creates actually a lot of narrative somehow.
We have time for one more question.
Hi, I came a long way to get here anyway, so I'm happy to be here. But, I was late for the talk, so I'm sorry if you already mentioned Mahler, but Kindertotenlieder, I I associate it with like that brand of melancholy, I guess. What do you think of that free-floating association with classical art, something that it's hard to kill, hard to die, maybe like raising something from the dead or something never died, melancholy, death of children?
I mean, I guess it's more a reference to Friedrich Schiller, but then I thought, obviously, the piece of Mahler is very known and we were aware of it, so I thought it's interesting that the piece is referring to romantic culture. So I wouldn't say classical, but I would be more specific and say romantic or late romanticism. And obviously there is, I think, a strong link between contemporary black metal culture, for example, or some types of teenage culture, gothic, emo, or whatever, and romanticism. And I'm very interested in the link between character from Wedekind or the young Werther from Goethe. I mean, I would say romantic heroes and these self-destruction, suicidal teenagers who are depicting, and you will see the way we did it. I mean, we try to stage it in a somehow, I guess, in a very seductive way. I think we really try to enhance the fascination or we can have in front of a falling apart body, the ruin. Could be architectural, it could be psychological, it can be physical. But anything how from something or somebody falling apart eventually something sublime and seductive in obviously in an ambivalent way could come out of it. So I guess this is very, very strong. This is probably very strong into romantic art and behavior.
Well, all right. I'd like to thank you all for coming, and I hope you enjoyed the show. Thank you, Gisele.
Thank you very much.